The new BMW X5, the ultimate sports activity vehicle.
Feel this wrong.
The last two videos I filmed at the Wreckers, we were talking about Holdens and we were talking about Fords. But the one group of cars that normally end up at the Wreckers, we haven't talked about yet, and that is heavily depreciated luxury cars. So not only are the Wreckers filled with these little crap boxes, old Camrys, Fords, Holdens, like I've already talked about, it is full of old luxury cars like Beamers and Mercs and Jags, because they're so expensive to fix that even their high price tag doesn't justify keeping the cars, and so they just end up here. And the first car we're going to talk about, and it's very, very notoriously unreliable, Jaguars. Over here we have a Jaguar X-Type, which, funnily enough, is actually loosely based around an AU Falcon. Not entirely, but the rear independent suspension was very, very similar to an AU XR6 rear end, because Jaguar was owned by Ford back in the day. They took the suspension out of an X-Type and put it in an AU. But anyway, this over here looks to be some sort of V8, V6 something, I don't care. Jaguars are notoriously unreliable. A lot of electrical issues, a lot of mechanical problems, especially the newer ones. The Jaguar Land Rover group, the quality has just been going downhill. At least back in the day, Jaguars were known for their prestigious hand-built nature and the way they were assembled and stuff. Today, it's just known for horrendous reliability and crazy, crazy depreciation. So I just had a look on my phone. Back in the day, this Jaguar S-Type would have been anywhere between $90,000 and $170,000. This one over here I think is an 04 and 05 model. If you have a look on Facebook Marketplace, they're worth anywhere between $2,000 and like $6,000 for a really nice one. It's kind of crazy how badly depreciated these cars are. It just shows you that these cars over time, because of their poor build quality and because of all the problems they have, they're really not worth much money. Now I was just looking around to see what other car I could talk about, and sitting right next to this Jaguar S-Type is this Alfa Romeo 147 Twin Spark. Well, this car here is a little Alfa Romeo 147 Twin Spark, so it has a 2-litre engine, dual overhead cams, and 2 spark plugs per cylinder. These have a bit of a cult following, and I actually really wanted one of these when I was looking for my first car, because the 147 also came out in a 3-litre or a 3.2-litre Busso V6, and I have a bit of a soft spot for these cars. But Alfa Romeos, almost if not more unreliable than Jaguars. Starting off with the electrical problems. So as you can see, someone's already started taking apart this fuse box, probably to fix their own piece of shit Alfa Romeo. Alfa Romeo in the early 2000s, and even decades before that, with the Spiders and the GT V6s, they were not known for their reliability. But the one thing they were known for is their heart and their soul, and that's why people put money into these cars, and that's why these have a bit of a cult following. But in saying that, the market doesn't care about soul and about passion. So these cars inherently get totaled out, and they end up here because no one that's normal in the head wants to spend money on these cars, which is a shame, but it is what it is. Back in 2005, this car, brand new, was worth about $38,000 to $40,000 MSRP. Compared to the Jaguar S-Type over here, it's actually done pretty well for itself. One of these twin sparks in like rough-ish condition you could pick up for around $3,000, but the difference between really shit ones and really nice ones is actually quite a lot. a really nice 147 GTA with the 3.2 V6 will run you between $10,000 and $15,000. So obviously adjusted for inflation, it's still a lot of depreciation, but these actually haven't depreciated all that much. So one thing I never understood about people buying used cars is they don't do their research properly. People go out and buy used Audis, used Mercedes, used BMWs, Alphas, Jaguars, whatever, and they don't do their research properly. They don't realize that after 10 years, they end up looking like this. Now, I mean, the same can be said about regular cars, but there is a much higher chance of a really expensive car ending up like that than an affordable, reliable Japanese or even Australian car. So all these Alphas, people go, oh, I've always wanted an Alpha, or I've always wanted a Beamer or an Audi. They end up buying the cars. Once they've been heavily depreciated, they can't afford to fix them, so they just end up here. And there's a sea of them. Audi, BMW, Mercedes, Audi, VW, Mercedes, everywhere. Don't get me started on these shit French cars. So this wouldn't be an episode on heavily depreciated cars if we didn't at least talk about BMWs. I see a lot of wannabe rich looking people driving around in E87 1 Series BMWs because it's basically the cheapest way to get into a modern BMW. So these are around a 2007-2008, and it came with the, I believe, the N46 2-litre engine. Pretty garbage engines. Timing chain problems, as you can see. This one is snapped. I don't know if someone broke it or it just snapped. It's totally possible. That was one of the common problems with these. Coolant leaks, oil filter housing right here. A lot of plastic cooling components, but BMW's always been about that. There's nothing really good about these E87 BMWs other than the fact that they're quite cool because they're a rear-wheel drive hatchback, which you could get the 3-litre N52 engine and a 6-speed manual gearbox. So they're pretty cool in that regard. You can also get them with a diesel, crap engines, N47 engine, I'm pretty sure they're called. These cars, brand new, were probably between $50,000 and $60,000, and now I wouldn't pay $1,000 for one. This Volkswagen Touareg is one of the most popular, cheap, used 4-wheel drives people buy in order to look like they're driving in the lap of luxury. These cars were really good when they were brand new. They were really ahead of their time. This came out before the Porsche Cayenne and before the Audi Q7 because those cars are based on this car. The inside is a really nice place to be, at least for like 2003 whenever this car came out. Had 4-zone climate control, a 6-speed or 5 or a 6-speed automatic gearbox, switchable 4-wheel drive because this does have a transfer case. Some of them came with massaging seats, electric, heated and cooled seats, some of them. There are a lot of features in this car. However, because it is German and because it is filled to the brim with features, eventually they're all gonna stop working. And that's probably what's happened to this car. These have a lot of problems with injectors, oil leaks, coolant leaks, the usual spiel. I'm quite familiar with these cars because I used to work at Audi and I worked on a few older Q7s which have similar drivetrains to this. However, I've never really seen this engine before. The 3-litre turbo diesel that these did come with had a lot of problems with timing cover leaks, and the timing cover is on the back of the engine. And you can't just simply pull the engine out because there's actually not that much room when there's a 3-litre V6 stuck in here. So you got to drop the engine and the gearbox through the bottom. And that job alone, I've seen a customer get quoted $30,000 for on a car that's worth half that. So who in their right mind would want to spend 30 grand on a car that's worth 3 grand? This car, when it was brand new, was between $90,000 and $100,000. This car as it sits now, $1,000 to $2,000. It's a shame, but if these cars never existed, then a lot of the technology wouldn't have gotten implemented into more normal pedestrian cars. So we have the Germans to thank for that. So now we're walking up to one of the final boss second-hand luxury car wannabe rich look-alike. This is of course the 2007 E70 BMW X5 with the N57 3-litre turbo diesel, which is one of the most desirable 3-litre turbo diesel engines. A lot of people swap them into GU, GQ 80 series Land Cruisers. Very, very reliable, very robust engine. Of course, they have their usual problems, but just like any other engine, you resolve them and they're really, really good. These cars, you see a lot of people driving around that try and look rich. If they don't really know what these cars are, they just see the BMW badge, they see a BMW SUV, and they're like, oh, that must mean that I look rich. The people that do stuff like this exactly proves my point. These cars are actually a really good bargain nowadays because brand new, they were around $120,000 to $140,000 depending on which model you got. These days, you can pick one up, a really nice one, for between $10,000 and $15,000. The interiors are actually really quite nice. You got some wood grain, you got iDrive, you got a ZF transmission. I think this might have been one of the first ones with an 8-speed, but if not, it came with a ZF 6 HP, which are also really good. The good thing about these cars and the good thing about German SUVs is that most of them just drive like cars. So although it's a big over 2-ton SUV, they go around corners and they drive in a straight line just like a normal car would. They don't feel cumbersome and they don't feel industrial, which is the good thing about them. However, there is a reason why these cars end up at junkyards, and it's because people that buy them that don't know what they are, if they don't know what they're looking at, they just see the BMW badge, they go by the old rule of thumb. They're like, oh, it's German, it's built well, it must mean it's reliable. No. These early to mid 2000s European cars, this is the time when BMW, Mercedes, VW, they were all experimenting. They were putting in different technologies to see what would stick and what wouldn't stick. The well-off people that bought them, they got to experience them and then they traded them in for the next best thing. And then all these people heard such good things about these BMWs, they bought them used, and that's when they started failing, probably between 5 and 10 years later down the track. And this is probably exactly what happened to this car. Now, this wouldn't be a video on heavily depreciated European cars if I didn't include Land Rovers and Range Rovers. We already spoke about Jags. They're basically the same car except a sedan in terms of reliability, but this is an old disco. These cars are incredibly unreliable. The V8 models came with Rover V8s. Rover V8s were around in the British Leylands. They are a prehistoric 3.5 litre V8 engine, made no power. I don't know why they used them in these cars. They also had turbo diesel 5-cylinder engines, which were incredibly weird. One of the guys I used to work with was like an enthusiast for these TD5s. He would tell me about all these weird problems that they had and the fact that they only start up on 4 cylinders because only 4 of the cylinders have glow plugs, and then when the engine gets warm enough, it runs on 5. Very strange, very, very weird. These, I think the only real redeeming feature about these cars is that they have a solid front and rear end. So, theoretically, they're pretty good for fall driving, but you probably wouldn't take an old disco like this fall driving because you would, first of all, probably not make it to the fall driving track, but if you did, you would most certainly break down. And yeah, these cars were quite expensive when they were new. Nowadays, you can't even pay someone to take them away. But with any other car, like Alfa Romeo, as I spoke about earlier in the video, they do have a cult following. They're pretty cool, I must admit, but would I ever buy one? Absolutely not, and that includes these old Rangies as well.